Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to another of our November lecture series for Native American Heritage Month. My name is Chuck Smythe, and I'm Director of the Department of Culture and History here at Sealaska Heritage. And it's always great to be here in the Clan House with all of you and all of our visitors. I have a few announcements before introducing Emil Notti. And that is, first of all, reminding you again that celebration is this summer, June 10th through the 13th. Please put that on your calendar if you haven't already. That's the largest single gathering of Alaska Natives in the state every year, and it's a very exciting time. Lots of events going on. There is a schedule for future lectures. We do have a few more this month. The next one is on Thursday. Bruce Twomley will be speaking of the Molly Hooch case, which he was a co-counsel in, leading to the recognition of educational rights in the state of Alaska for villagers, small people living in small native villages. Please remember to sign up for our YouTube channel, SHI's YouTube channel. All of these lectures are there. And so they are very useful, but we appreciate if you would sign up for that. And finally, remember to turn off your cell phones, if you don't mind. So, Dr. Emil Notti, the first president of the Alaska Federation of Natives, was a force behind the statewide land claims movement and negotiations that culminated in the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act of 1971. We look forward to his address entitled AFN and the Inclusion of Sealaska in ANCSA. Dr. Notti was born in Koyukuk, Alaska, was graduated from Mount Edgecombe High School, and earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Aeronautical and Electrical Engineering from Northrop University. He is a U.S. Navy veteran and worked for Autonetics, a division of North American Aviation, on the Minuteman ballistic missile. He later worked for the Federal Aviation Administration in Alaska as an electronic engineer. During the 1960s, Dr. Notti served as president of the Cook Inlet Native Association, and in 1966, he called the first statewide meeting of Alaska Natives and their organizations, which was the first meeting of the Alaska Federation of Natives. He was elected its first president and served there before, during, and after the passage of ANCSA. In 1968, he became president of the Alaska Native Foundation and continued as president there well into the 1970s. He ran for Congress in a 1973 special election against Don Young and almost won. He lost by only 2,000 votes. Dr. Notti served under several Alaska governors as Deputy Commissioner of the Alaska Department of Health and Social Services, Commissioner of the Department of Community and Regional Affairs, and Commissioner of the Department of Commerce, Community, and Economic Development. He also served as the third president of Doyon Limited. Dr. Notti holds honorary doctorate degrees from Alaska Methodist University and the University of Alaska Anchorage. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Notti.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here. I'm honored to speak to you. I'm glad to be here and talk to you. My name is Gunax Dujay. I was adopted by the Sitka tribe, by the Littlefield family, and Coho. So my friends who want to tease me say the name means Athabascan who thinks he's a Tlingit. So I tease them also. I say, be careful. we're your grandfather, you know. When the Athabascans migrated to the Navajo country, some of them drifted out on the rivers to the coast and became Clickets. It was John Littlefield who adopted me, and I'll tell you a little bit about his mother. His mother was my first cousin. She's an Athabascan from the Yukon River. And she told me this story. She barely remembers being held, holding on to someone's hand, and they walked her up to the orphanage in Fort Yukon and left her there. She knew she had family, but she had never met them. When she became a teenager, she went to the Eklutna boarding school just outside of Anchorage. And on a Saturday, her and a couple of friends went into Anchorage to have ice cream and a movie or something, and took a cab back to Eklutna. On the way back, they passed this good-looking young army guy in a uniform, so they stopped the cab, and he got in, and they said, "Where are you going?" He said, "I'm going to Eklutna. I'm going to go see my sister, Martha Carlo." Well, they screamed and stopped the cab and jumped out, went out and hugged each other and cried. And that's how she met her family. She had 5 brothers. But there was a lot of grief in the early 30s and 40s because there were a lot of orphans in Alaska. I went to Eklutna in 1944, and it's hard to say, but a big percentage of the kids there were orphans. Native people in Alaska went through probably the worst tuberculosis epidemic ever recorded in the world. Nobody knows how many people died. There was a lot of grief. Families died off. Villages disappeared. I knew a family in Ruby. They had 11 kids die from tuberculosis. The mother couldn't stand it anymore, so she jumped off a river boat in the middle of the Yukon. There was a lot of grief. By 1950, the Native people were physically, emotionally, and spiritually defeated. There were many orphaned homes in Alaska. Jesse Lee home is probably the best known because a 13-year-old boy named Benny Benson designed the Alaska flag. But there were many other orphaned homes in Alaska. I went to Eklutna in 1944. Prior to that, we trapped up on the Kaikuk River, and I went to Mount Edgecombe in 1947. From Mount Edgecombe, I went to Eklutna. From Eklutna, I came to Mount Edgecombe. In Sitka, Mount Edgecombe would let us go to A&B meetings in Sitka. And I didn't know what I was watching, but I was really glad I got to see some of those meetings. They were long, but they were formal. The speeches were formal and very dignified. But this coming to Southeast was a whole new experience for me. I was amazed when I first saw the totem poles. We had nothing like that up on the Yukon. There were students in school who could hammer out a ring from a 25-cent piece, and they could carve small totem poles. We had a lot of talented students there. But the Tlinkits were much more organized than we were up on the Yukon. I learned at one time that you controlled the fishing in your streams, and that you also had the responsibility, the family had the responsibility of cleaning up the streams to keep them healthy for salmon returns. You were organized, you were strong, and talented people. But new people coming into the country did not obey Tlingit laws, and the army refused to enforce your laws. About 1760, there was an English jurist who wrote that those who write laws are rulers. And when new people came in to Alaska, they brought laws with them. And those laws were enforced with military power. And that military force was used against Angoon in the middle of winter. And the laws that are passed many times work against Native people. When the limited entry law passed, people I went to high school with went into fishing. When I went into the Navy, they stayed behind and fished. That's all I ever did. Quite a few of them did not get seining permits, herring permits, trolling permits, and some of them even lost their beach fishing sites. Now, when that happened, and as far as some of the people, Tlingit people didn't get to fish, they lost part of their heritage. They were ocean people who paddled their canoes all the way to Portland, probably. And they lost, when they didn't fish, they lost part of their heritage. But when I was 16, I fished in Craig, Klawock, and Heidelberg. And I always felt I was safe. I had a lot of friends, made a lot of friends in Southeast Alaska. But what followed was discrimination and for jobs, mainly. The state is a good example. State employment of Native people used to be around 4%. A&B, A&S always fought those numbers, tried to improve them. But today we still have the same problem, only it's worse. Look at the numbers of people begging on the street corners in Anchorage. One day I counted on one corner 13 people looking for a handout. Looking for a handout in a wealthy state, homeland to their ancestors. I've seen people sleeping on cardboard in the middle of winter, out in the snow. The state really should be alarmed by that. And yet, the state does not provide adequate training to make the transition from subsistence to the jobs. As a matter of fact, the state is trying to bust up unions, and unions provide the best training. They turn out certified workers. And here we are trying to break unions and cut money for education. 400,000 people came to the state for pipeline work, and the villagers didn't get very many of those jobs. 400,000 people are making a good living on the resources of Alaska, and people who live here didn't benefit in the same ratio. And a few years ago, I was in Ottawa. I picked up the newspaper, and the headline was, "Canada embarks on job training." They need a trained workforce if you're going to have development. We should do no less than provide training to replace the loss of subsistence. You hear a lot of talk about the need for development, and the people who promote development always promise two things. One is it's going to solve the state unemployment problem. Number two, it's going to solve the state budget problem. Let's look at two examples. Sitka Chamber of Commerce promoted development. We're a fishing town. We need year-round employment. They got a mill, pulp mill. Before the mill, there were 3,000 people in Sitka. When the mill opened, there were 6,000 people. There were more people unemployed in Sitka than before the mill. Didn't solve that problem. Number two, the city budget went crazy. Water lines, sewer lines, electric lines, high schools, police protection. The budget wasn't solved. So development the way we do it doesn't solve those problems. Let's look at the pipeline development in Alaska. They promised development would solve those problems. Today, there are more unemployed people in Alaska than before the pipeline. In 1970, state budget was about $300 million with no deficit spending. Today, what is it, 12 billion? We're spending our savings, that's deficit spending. That development did not solve the problems. Sitka used to, or not Sitka, but there used to be small sawmills in many places in southeast Alaska. They provided year-round jobs. You could keep sawmills running forever with small timber cuts without clear cutting. You could keep these communities healthy with employment year-round. But we like mega projects, it seems. Achieving statehood contributed to the native loss of subsistence lifestyle. State land selections are for the purpose of resource development. Resource development is in conflict with subsistence. Subsistence hunters are in competition with increased numbers of sport hunters and sports fishermen. The state has failed to provide. We're planning to replace the subsistence lifestyle. That conflict over use of land and the crowding in the villages and the competition for land led to regional organizations being formed. To gain strength, those regional organizations formed the Alaska Federation of Natives. Governor Hickel's attorney told us we had no legal claim to land. Of course, he was wrong. It's proved in court that we had title and ownership of land. That it ended with the organization and payment to Tlingit Naidas of Alaska. In 1966, the BIA director in Juneau here was selected to be the Commissioner of Indian Affairs. He was in D.C. being vetted to be commissioner when he was asked he was told by the chairman, he said, you are an Indian. He was Oneida Indian from Minnesota, I think. He said, you're an Indian. What would you do different? The United States government spends hundreds of millions of dollars a year to solve the Indian problem in America. And the Indian problem has been 200 years the same. High unemployment, underachievement in education, poor housing, no jobs, high infant mortality. Every way you cut the data, Indian people are on the bottom. What will you do different? Bob Bennett started to answer, and the senator stopped him and said, I don't want an off-the-cuff answer. Bring a written report back in 90 days. He did that. The BIA reported to the Senate that they would draw up a final solution to the land problem in Alaska. And that land problem was Native people were protesting state selections. And we were able to get a freeze on the land. I was with Stanley McCutcheon, who was advising us, compliments of the Townick Native Village. And I heard one side of the conversation. He convinced Stuart Udall, Secretary of Interior, that he was the protector of native lands. Udall instituted the land freeze. Now, I'm sure he didn't do it alone. He had to have the president's permission to do that. But the state went nuts, I guess, to put it mildly. They accused us of driving the state into bankruptcy. That the land freeze was illegal. It broke the state compact, the conditions we became a state under. And so AFN got busy writing a bill. We wrote a bill by committee, a big committee, word by word, line by line. And we didn't trust each other very much. We didn't know each other very well. And we argued about everything. As an example, there was the division of land. How are you going to divide up the goods? Arctic Slope pulled out of AFN. We had to negotiate them to get them back in. But that was an example. We had to move Congress. Congress was in no mood to settle for large parcels of land. The chairman of the House committee proposed 500,000 acres. We got close to 100 times that. He proposed something in the neighborhood of excuse me, $10 million. We got something close to 100 times that. And I should say, it was not a negotiated settlement. We wrote a bill. There were 8 bills. What came out was handed out. This is it, take it or leave it. By then we were broke and tired, and so we took the deal. At the same time, we was working with Congress, we had people working with the White House to get them to agree to 40 million acres of land. And in the end, they did, and that's what swung. Once the president said that, we were working with the Democratic Congress in the House and the Senate. Republicans had the presidency. When the president swung with 40 million, the Republican Party followed the president. Democrats weren't going to be outdone, so they voted 40 million acres. So, serendipity. On the way, we needed Congress to take us more serious. On my way to Washington State, where Scoop Jackson had control of our bill, I talked to the Northwest Federated Tribes at Pacific Lutheran University. About 700 to 800 people showed up. And that was after 4 years. I couldn't go down there and say, we've been testifying to Congress and getting pushed around. We'd show up for a meeting and they'd say, come back tomorrow. We weren't too important. The Vietnam War was on, other big debates, so we needed to get attention. So I wrote a separate nation speech. And I said, if Congress can't support 40 million acres of land, I would approach, and I would recommend AFN approach United Nations or the World Court and ask for a separate nation. After all, the United States spent billions of dollars creating the country of Israel. How could they do less for people who lost all of the North American continent? I like to think it made a difference. I don't know that. But Congress didn't take us seriously. While waiting to testify one day, I sat through a House Interior Committee, and these 34 members in Congress were talking about taxing in the South Pacific Islands, halfway around the world. And the only people who testified were about 4 Chamber of Commerce people, no locals. And I thought, what power? They're taxing people halfway around the world and not even listening to anything they had to say. See, that could be us. We needed more visibility. We had to raise our profile. The state opposed us. Chamber of Commerce opposed us. As a matter of fact, Chamber of Commerce here in Juneau had an annual meeting, and they mocked us. You know, what did we think we were doing? We had no rights to land. Mayors opposed us, newspapers opposed us, editorials opposed us. But it was good for newspapers. They had a story about land claims about every day for 5 years. And before we had lead attorneys, we had the 12 different regions had their own attorney. We were able to get Arthur Goldberg through John Borbridge, through his attorney, was able to get Arthur Goldberg, Supreme Court Justice, and Arthur Goldberg brought Ramsey Clark, the former U.S. Attorney General, and that made a big difference. We testified. This committee had voted on their appointments as Supreme Court and Attorney General, so they knew them, they trusted them, and they gave us a lot of credibility, and had made a big difference. We had, as I said, we had a lot of opposition, but here's an example of the kind of opposition we had. It was emotional and appealed to the majority of people in Alaska. In a primary, one of the Republican candidates for governor made the statement that he had to oppose our proposal because he did not want the Native people to steal a white man's birthright. So we had to overcome a lot of opposition in Alaska. One of the big arguments we had was, should the Alaska Native Brotherhood and Tlingit and Haida join AFN? Tlingit people had strong voices in our meetings. John Borbridge, William Paul, Roger Lang, Marlene Johnson, Myron Malott, Judson Brown, and others. John Hope from Sitka was always at my elbow. I chaired most of the meetings, and he was right there as our parliamentarian. So you had strong voices. And admitting Tlingit and Haida became an agenda item, and we devoted most of a day to debates on it. Each of the 12 regional associations had an attorney, and They participated in the debate. Arguments for and against the participation was emotional, sometimes heated. Arguments can be summarized by two issues. Tlingit and Haida already had a settlement. If they joined us, they would weaken our argument for a settlement. Also, there was fear that other regions would get less once we came to dividing up whatever the settlement turned out to be. The arguments for having them join was that their participation would give us strength. We needed their experience, we needed their knowledge, we needed their support. They had lawyers who understood Indian law. None of our local attorneys had any idea about Indian law. And what we were trying to do went beyond Indian law. It went directly to Congress, bypassed the courts. We needed you. The Alaska Attorney General knew nothing about Indian law. His only argument was that he believed we had no land rights. And the state hired an outside attorney. He was a good lawyer, but they needed him because no one knew much about Indian law. None of them had been taught in the Indian law when they were in school, so they needed outside advice. In the arguments for Tlingit and Haida joining, the attorneys got too involved. They were trying to tell us what to do. They quit trying to advise us. They were telling us what we should do. One lawyer made a motion. I ruled him out of order. He said he had a right to make a motion for his clients, and I said they're capable of making a motion if they needed to. So, but he wanted to argue. He insisted he had a right to make a motion. That was too much. I stopped the meeting, and we emptied the room except for the 25-man member board, and argued for another couple hours just amongst ourselves. When we went to a vote, the 25-member board split 12-12. I cast a tie-breaking vote that brought in Tlingit and Haida with us to join AFN. And what happened to that in their settlement? They went from $7.2 million for the Tlingit and Haida settlement with no land. Their original payout from the fund was $175 million, and they got 290,000 acres of land. But their claim is not settled yet. Not until all the villages get land. I would pay William Paul's way to Washington, D.C. Some board members objected to it because he was not a board member. He had no client. And I paid his way even when he disagreed with us. Maybe because he disagreed with us. I thought he had things to say that we were not saying. He made the argument that there were rights to offshore assets and resources that needed to be settled. And that's an issue I think that's still alive. Other regions need to join in that argument and support what you're trying to do. But all that I've said so far is history. Looking forward, you will endure as a people because of your own efforts. From what I see on TV, you're strengthening your language, your art, your dancing, your culture. The University of Alaska had a language specialist. He was not a native. He knew a lot about the Athabascan language. The words were saved, and he could tell you all the ways to use the words, but something is lost. No one can teach the language except you. Something is lost in inflection of the voice, the rhythm, the change of tone in the voice that carry meaning. That only comes from original speakers. But you will endure, you will thrive because of your own efforts. You will thrive because of your honor, because of your honesty, because of your sobriety, and because you support each other. You will thrive because you have strong people like Rosita Worrell, Aaron Lott, and others who work hard that your culture will always stay strong. Thank you.
Gunalchish, Anyat Kusani. Thank you, most noble Emil Notti. We from Southeast Alaska owe you a great debt. We owe you for our lives. We owe you for our land. We owe you for our culture. All that you did in bringing us into the Alaska Native Land Claims Settlement Act. Emil Notti will always live in our hearts. We have promised that our children are going to know him. They are going to know the deeds that he did for Alaska Native people and for Southeast Alaska Natives. We are truly honored to have him here. Today we have history before us. Today you have heard history in the making. You have heard the beginnings of Native corporations and all that the Native corporations have brought to this state. They have brought great wealth, not only for Native people, but to the state of Alaska. I remind people that the wealth of Alaska comes from Alaska Native land. And we owe great thanks to these leaders. We are also very fortunate in having two other leaders who played a very prominent place in the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. And I would invite them, Marlene Johnson, first chair of Sealaska Corporation, to join us. I would invite Byron Malott. Byron Malott, who was the CEO of Sealaska. Byron Malott, who has served in many positions in the state of Alaska and working in the Native community. I invite them here to join Emil Notti in saying a few words.
I'm the oldest one, so I go first. In the early days, when I was the president of Rural Camp, before AFN was around, and we were looking for, I shouldn't say just we, but people like Emil Notti, Willie Hensley, Johnny Schaefer, and a few others were trying to get together to form AFN. Their plan wasn't to form AFN, but get together to fight for land claims, to do what we needed to do. But they didn't have any money. So as president of RollCap and our executive committee, we would call a meeting and ask them to come and give us an update of what they were doing. We would pay their transportation in their hotel. And once they got there, after we got through with our business, we'd adjourn our meeting, and Emil and Willie and Byron and the rest of the leaders would get together and come up with their plan. And that was, to me, really an exciting time for the Alaska Natives, because we had to sell it out in the villages of what we were doing, and we were able to do that. And we had the leadership of our elders, and they told me what to do. And so that, to me, was a very exciting time, and I just pleased to death to have worked with Emil to have worked with Willie, Johnny Schaefer, a few others and brought Byron out of college to join us, and he did one heck of a job, as you all know. So thank you, Emil. Thank you very much.
Again, to emphasize, Marlene Johnson was the chair of Rural Cap, and Rural Cap was pivotal, absolutely pivotal in allowing, bringing Native people from across the regions so that they could meet. It's one of the things I think we're good at doing is making institutions work for us in multiple different ways. I'd now like to invite Byron, but before I do that, I want to pay recognition to our current CEO, Anthony Malott, who is standing in the back there. He feels like he's too young, doesn't want to be part of history yet, but he is bringing us into the next century in a very powerful way. So just want to recognize Anthony Malott, CEO, Sealaska.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Marlene, Emil, it's a, Madam President, it's always wonderful to listen to Emil. He's soft-spoken. He's a man of character and integrity. A man who really downplays his role in the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act and in the Native community overall. I came to Juneau in 1965 from Yakutat, where I was mayor, into the office of Governor Bill Egan. And there were very few Alaska Natives in state government then, very few. And so it was kind of natural that I met Emil relatively early on. Emil was working for the Alaska State Human Rights Commission at the time under a wonderful leader named Willard Bowman. And Emil and I got to know one another. We both had the ability to travel, which not a lot of us in those days did. Travel across the state. And Emil, I was going through files just recently and came across your letter that you sent to, I think, maybe about 25 people? 12, yeah. And I still have my letter. And I will cherish it forever, and one day it will be here in this institution. But Emil was, whenever I think of the individual who, in its very earliest beginnings, gave the Native community and the institution it would build to represent us, the Alaska Federation of Natives, gave it strength, gave it a sense of humility, gave it a sense of purpose, gave it a sense of integrity and character and morality. That individual is residing in Emil Notti as our first president. And as Rosita said, we in Southeast know of Emil's contribution. It is wonderful to have him here and in a few words give us the sense of what it took to bring Southeast into the overall Native Claims Settlement Act after having achieved its own essentially minuscule settlement, but a settlement which still endures. That settlement still provides leadership and strength and capacity to the Tlingit and Haida people of Southeast Alaska. So in recognition of your role, Emil, and of your continuing leadership, I'd like to ask Rosita and Marlene to join me here. Present you a gift from the people of Southeast Alaska, presented by the Sealaska Heritage Institute.
Wow. Take it home.
That's your casket.
As you know, we use our boxes, our bent wood boxes, as a metaphor for our box of knowledge. And for this is our box of knowledge for the history that Emil gave to us as a state, that gave to us as Southeast Alaska. And so, Emil, all of our love is going to go into that box for our love for you from Southeast Alaska. And I might just note that the box, I'm very proud of this, that it was made by Aaron Phillips, who is an Alutiiq. And we claim the Alutiiq because they came here very early in our history. He's an artist from Kodiak. I'm very excited to say that he was one of the artists in one of our SHI arts training programs and classes. And the chest designs are of human forms and copper inlays. We are proud to support our working artists. And so, Emil, you're taking not only Southeast Alaska, but Alaska with you. Gunalchish.
Thank you. Well, all I can say is thank you. That's a wonderful gift, and it'll be displayed prominently at my home. Thank you very much.
Emil said he'd be willing to take a few questions. If we have the microphone here, if you'll come forward, introduce yourself, and pose your question to Emil. And I suppose we could even ask Byron and Marlene if they'd be responsive to questions as well, or further comments.
Gunalchish, Mr. Notti, and congratulations to your gift. May this box of knowledge have all the knowledge of those that you worked with from the very beginning of this journey that you've brought us to the present. I thank you for being that tiebreaker and bringing in Central Council, Tlingit and Haida. That opened opportunities for the rest of our tribal governments to have that government-to-government relationship that we currently have. I thank you for working with and putting up with Marlene, because we still endure. But in all seriousness, Mr. Notti, I want to just thank you so much for the things, the important opportunities, the voices that have been heard in Congress. And even though we may have walls that we have to try and knock down, because we get new congressmen and senators all the time that be appointed to different committees or whatever areas that we need to really push our agenda and be heard. But you've opened that doors for us, and it's helping us now to educate our generations to truly understand what ANCSA is, how our tribal governments operate and what the purposes are, and how our tribal governments have sovereignty, and our native corporations do not, but they do have our lands. So it's, in my eyes, it's a trade-off, but we can still have that balance as what's so important to us as Alaska Native Tlingit people, to have balance. And you've brought that. You've brought that to us, and we get to hear it, and we get to see it, and we heard your voice today. Gunalchish, Gunalchish.
Thank you for the kind words.
Skinya Kla Yuchat Duathak Suknachari Aya. My mother is Mary Lekanoff, and my father,
She's my classmate.
Lori Lekanoff, and I just really came up to introduce myself because we met back in 1970 when you were traveling back there with a lot of those people that were very formative in the development of the land claims bill, and I just wanted to come back up and reintroduce myself.
Yeah.
Thank you for everything that you do, and we appreciate it. Good night, Chish.
Thank you for your words. Your mother was my high school classmate. So.
Emil, thank you for explaining the role of your advocates, in particular Justice Goldberg and Attorney General Ramsey Clark, the help that they gave to Marlene and to you in this drafting and committee process. And I wonder, could you take your explanation just a step further? There's one aspect of the ANCSA process that's always been a mystery to me and to others, and that is, could you explain the choice that you and Marlene and your group, the committees, faced between choosing Native corporations, business corporations, as the vehicle to administer ANCSA, as opposed to the other alternatives such as the traditional BIA structure? So I wonder, could you take a moment and explain how did we get corporations? Thank you.
Well, I'm always glad to answer a question like that because I prescribe to the philosophy of David Brinkley from Huntley Brinkley News, because he said, everybody's entitled to my opinion. So I'm glad to answer you. We looked at the reservation system. We weren't too enamored by it, but we probably could not have got trust land anyway, because the chairman of the committee, Scoop Jackson from Washington State, said Congress was not going to set up enclaves in Alaska, which to me meant no reservations. And he was running for president. He was very powerful. I don't think we could have got around him anyway. So, and we had a Stanford lawyer who pushed it, but in the end, we thought that was the best way. We also looked at what happened to the IRA canners in Southeast Alaska, which were not managed by local people, but by managers picked by the BIA who probably weren't Alaskans, and they all went broke when fortunes were being made in the fishing business. So we used to say, if mistakes are made, we'll make them ourselves. So, that answer you?
Good afternoon. My name is David Boxley. I'm from Metlakatla.
Right.
Actually, that previous question helped clarify some things for me, but as somebody who is not connected to this the way everyone else is, there's been a curiosity to me, and maybe more than one of you will be able to answer this for me. What was my people's, I know we said no, but that's all I know, really. What was our argument to deny or to opt out of this process? And it's kind of a hard question to ask, and I mean it with no disrespect, but have the downsides of not fighting for, I'm not sure how to phrase this, more permanent things like reservations or that, how do you feel those have weighed out now in retrospect?
First of all, I think Metlakatla has the best deal of all. There was that was the big weakness in the land claims, because it's been said, if I might quote you, that the seeds of destruction are in AFM, is in the land settlement. I think that the village corporations should get protection of land, without land, Native people are lost. They'll fall through the cracks and just they'll disappear. So the effort to get land into trust for villages who need the protection. The corporations who have land can be left out. They can handle themselves. And if they lose the land, it's too bad, but it's not catastrophic like the loss of village land will be when it's lost. And again, I say, land claims was not negotiated. We did not sit down and give or take. It was handed out to us, and it wasn't our bill. Our bill was a big part of it, but there were 8 bills, and they were put together, picked and choose, and behind closed doors, I might say, and handed out. It was unilateral in the end. So, did that?
What was mine, if you recall, what was our council's argument against?
As far as I remember, there was no argument by it. If they took a vote, I think it was the right vote.
That's how we feel about it.
Good.
Except, one second. This is a really complex question, and I've asked Byron if he could offer further comments on it before we take the next question. But I do want to say that I have heard stories, from Herman Kitka and others who did go to Metlakatla and ask if you wanted to join into ANCSA, and your non-presence gave the answer.
Also, on that question, reservation members could enroll in ANCSA if they had a community or even at large, but they would give up their reservation and their status. So there was an option. I'm not sure many took it. On the issue of corporations, just very quickly, I'd mentioned that Emil helped bring a sense of integrity and morality and a sense of fairness into ANCSA. And I can recall a meeting in which corporations were raised in the context of, well, what do corporations do? We wanted several things. We didn't want a per capita settlement and have everything just disappear in the initial distribution. We wanted land to endure for generations. We wanted everybody to be treated equally. And that's the fundamental purpose of share ownership in the way that it was set up. And someone said, well, corporations kind of do that. They're meant to last for long periods of time. If you own shares, as a share owner, you are treated like every other share owner, except for the amount that you have in terms of monetary value. And corporations can endure from generation to generation, was kind of that kernel of thought. But none of us had any knowledge or involvement or history at all with the corporate world, and fundamentally really didn't know what we were getting into. And as Emil said, ultimately the decision was made for us. There had been recommendations about different kinds of corporations, about one big corporation, about, and we got what we got. 7I is part of the corporate structure built around the notion that we should all share equally in a statewide land settlement, and that it was known, or at least believed, well, it was known. Prudhoe Bay had been discovered, and so we knew that the Arctic Slope had vast oil resources. We knew that, or believed that in the southwest part of the state, there were the possibility that there were no resources on the land, at least economic resources. And a belief was that if we shared and shared alike, which was the basis for 7I, that all of us would ultimately prosper. And I wanted to emphasize that. It was about trying to create a settlement that would benefit natives across the state equally, that would endure for generations. I was the one who said in a hearing many, many years ago, or in an article, that in ANCSA itself are the seeds of its destruction, unless we changed ANCSA, which we did. We have changed ANCSA many times. And there is no question that ANCSA will need to continue to be changed, and until we resolve the land issue, as Emil mentioned, so that native institutions, tribes, can literally own native lands, be stewards of native lands. They would not own them in the way that corporations own them. It would have to be a very different construct. But we have a ways to go. We have changed ANCSA many times already by dint of our own beliefs and values and philosophy, and I believe that we can continue to do so.
Go ahead, Shane.
Mr. Emil, I want to say thank you. Danakish Yuka Duasak, Gane Kwan Kwashukwan Uhit Ayakat, Kakiakagwan Tanyatki. I want to Ganesh Chish for giving us a culture and a past to be proud of, a reality to be confident in, and a future to look forward to. Ganesh Chish.
Thank you. I'm glad to be part of it.
Gunakchi Shimo for your talk today. I think we've thanked you hundreds of times for that vote, and I'll thank you again, and I hope we thank you hundreds of more times. One of the best things that you said in one of the instances that you were discussing that vote, you said all else, all the arguments, whatever else, it was the right thing to do. And I think that speaks to your character. And I thank you for that just acknowledgement that it was the right thing to do. And we all agree with you. I also want to deeply thank you for mentioning those that may not still have land and are still in that fight. Your words of encouragement will keep our landless communities going. They heard you, and I'll make sure that we bring that message back to them, because they're facing their own difficulties. They're facing some of those own statements that you represented, that you faced when you were battling for ANCSA. Our landless communities are still facing that, and we need to support them, and we'll keep that fight going until our landless communities have the land that they deserve. Thank you for mentioning them. Cheers. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Notti. Good afternoon, Ms. Dr. Worrell and Auntie Marlene and Byron. My Tlingit name is Katkun. My taxpayer name is Carla Kasalukin. I wanted to also thank you for all of you, and especially you, Mr. Notti, for what you've given to us descendants. I am a shareholder descendant, and because of you last night, and I shared this to a text message to our current president, Malat, my 18-year-old son was able to deposit his check in his very first Sealaska check as a Sealaska shareholder descendant. And we purposely opted to not sign up for direct deposit for this check so he could hold the actual paper check in his hand and know what it meant, and all the struggles that came with him getting that one first paper check. And coincidentally, it's the first one for him, but it's also based on record earnings for our corporation. So with that, I think I wanted to share that with you, but I also wanted to ask your input on the 1/4 blood quantum that was folded into the law itself, because I feel like I probably know the answer why it was in there, but I'm sure I can guess, but I wanted to hear your thoughts as to the blood quantum being incorporated in there, because I feel like what that's done is caused a division amongst our own people. My children are not full blood, but I can guarantee that there are probably those who are full blood who know a lot less than my children do. My children have learned to speak Tlingit. They know our clan histories, they know our clan songs, they know our foods, but yet there are some of our own people who would think that they are less than, simply because of this Western construct of paper genocide committed against us. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts as to that provision and what ultimately we can do to eliminate that and just go straight to lineal descent.
Thank you. Well, that's a good question, and the question is, in some ways, when do you stop becoming an Indian? When are you no longer an Indian? But I'm not exactly sure how we ended up on 1/4, but it was acceptable. But in the event that they could not prove they were 1/4, if the community accepted them, they were members. And as far as ongoing concerns, I think the corporation and the tribes can decide who their members are. I think you can do that now, but I'm not a lawyer, so I think that's an argument worth bringing up and deciding on. Just another few comments. The settlement fight was never about money. It was always about land. We were willing, and we made the argument, that if the land didn't provide anything, we would take nothing. We would take 2%, though, of anything that came out of the ground, forever. And I had a senator come screaming at me because he said he'd never agree to 2%. He would never allow his kids' heritage to be robbed. But it wasn't about money, it was always about land. And just to show you how controversial this thing was at one time, there was a contract out on me for my involvement. And I called the Attorney General and asked him what he knew about it. I heard rumors of it, and he said nothing. He got the state troopers called me, and he said, "What you've been hearing is true. We're with you 24 hours a day. We're outside of your house 24 hours a day. We watch your kids come out and get in the bus and follow it to school. We watch them come out of school and follow it home until they go into your house. We'll go to lunch with you." It was a pretty serious threat at one time, but the troopers knew all about it. All that illustrated was that there was some major opposition to what we did. Again, it was never about money, it was always land.
Well, we want to thank Emil again for this wonderful presentation. He was definitely a very bold and visionary leader. Not only the 2% overriding royalty that he proposed, he also proposed maybe having Western Alaska as a separate state for Alaska Natives. Of course, the leaders love that. Well, we want thank you all for coming. I hope you've learned a lot from this lecture, and hopefully you'll attend our future lectures. I know that Emil will also be lecturing tomorrow at the Alaska State Museum, and want to thank his 2 nieces over there for organizing that. And we'll see you on Thursday, hopefully. Thank you very much for coming.